Hey there, sewing friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tilley, and I run a little sewing pattern business out of my home here in North Carolina called Tilley Handmade, and I sell my patterns on my website, antilleyhandmade.com, and through some select fabric stores across the country, mostly in North Carolina, but I even sell all the way in Berkeley, California. Big shout out to Stone Mountain and Daughter Fabrics. Been a huge support of my little business, so we appreciate them. Go check them out. I have my most recent pattern here on my cutting table, the throwback dress. And today I'm gonna walk you through everything you need to know about designing this dress, choosing a size, choosing your fabric, getting everything cut, and having the best success you can have with this pattern. So let's get started. The throwback dress is a vintage inspired design. It's actually inspired by an actual vintage dress that I used to own many years ago. It also is the same front to back, so there's no front side or back side. It can be worn either way. So both of those components kind of went into the name throwback dress. I deem this a beginner friendly pattern, so this is a great first garment to make as someone who's just starting to get into garment making. It has an A-line silhouette, so the tightest part of the dress is going to be right at the bust, and then it's going to flow out, and if you think of an A letter, it's going to flow out in a nice shape there. And then it also has a bell sleeve, so there's actually no shoulder seam, and then the sleeve is just shaped almost a similar way as the A-line, so you really only have one seam that's going from the end of the sleeve through the armpit and down to the hem of the bottom of the dress. It's a very quick dress to cut out and very quick to sew up. One of the things that I added to this pattern is I give you a variety of different ways to build this garment using this pattern. So I give you a way to sew it with a full lining, to sew it with side seam pockets, multiple ways to finish the neckline and hem. So when I am developing a garment and making a garment, this is the way that I approach a garment, is I'll like figure out the fit and silhouette, and then once I figure out the fabric, I start troubleshooting how it's going to be hemmed, and it's always in response to the material I'm using, how polished I want the look to be. And so all of these components go into designing a garment. And so I write the instructions in a similar way, where I'm encouraging you to think like a designer and say, okay, if you have this kind of fabric, these kind of finishes are going to look really good with this, and I would recommend going down this route. So the instructions kind of read as almost like a choose your own adventure based on, you know, the look that you want, the finished look of the dress, as well as the materials that you're using. This dress works great with a light to mid-weight woven fabric, especially a woven fabric that has a nice drape to it. Because this dress is all-in-one and there's no set-in sleeve, you're going to have some wrinkling. So actually, the shirt that I'm wearing right now is also an all-in-one sleeve. This is the Endless Summer shirt, which is another pattern that I sell on my website. This is actually the one I made in the sew-along for this pattern. But this also has an all-in-one sleeve. And so what that means is that you're not like removing fullness by having a seam here. So you will have some wrinkling when your arm comes down to your side and the sleeve comes down. So if you choose a really stiff or thick fabric, it's just going to be kind of bulky here. Whereas like this gauze, this cotton gauze that this shirt is made out of, it's so limp that it just kind of falls in line here, and it's not, you know, it's not unflattering. And so I would look for something that has a nice drape or flow to it. So if you think of anything that's like rayon or viscous, or, you know, chalet, things like that have a really nice flowiness to it. It also really can work with a knit fabric as well. I just would avoid super drapey. In this case, I wouldn't go super drapey with the knit. Like I would avoid maybe a bamboo stretch knit, but you could certainly do like a Ponte double knit would look really nice. I just think if you go with something too stretchy, the dress is going to get really big on you, and you would have to maybe just think about taking it down a few sizes. So a stable knit or a drapey woven. I'll show you some examples. This is a velvet dress that I made for the photo shoot. And so what's so nice about only having that one seam right here is that you can choose a trickier fabric like this, and you just have to make yourself, you know, work your way through that one seam, and then the rest of the dress is left really pristine to just enjoy the fabric. So this lends itself really well to a highly patterned fabric because you don't have to worry about pattern matching, and you can just really enjoy like a beautiful design. This is a vintage terry cloth fabric that I got at the Creative Reuse Center, and everyone that I've shown this dress to, they're like, oh, it's a beach cover-up, which it could absolutely be a beach cover-up, but I also think that terry cloth can be good anytime. But doesn't this scream summertime? This dress was actually the first version of this dress that I made in a YouTube video. That was actually the first time I worked with this pattern, and it's an old curtain that I got from my old job, and I actually think it's like a raw silk or something comparable to that. So it's just a simple plain woven, but then I added this fun screen print to it to actually replicate the original vintage dress that this was based off of. Other than the fabric you need for the main body of the dress, in terms of additional materials needed, it's really dependent on how you want to finish this dress. In the instructions, I give you multiple different ways to finish the dress. So you have an option to add side seam pockets. And so in that case, you might be able to use the fabric that you're using for the whole rest of the dress. Or if you're like in that case of the velvet dress, you'd probably want something thinner to use for the pockets then. Velvet pockets can be a little bulky. There's also an opportunity to fully line the dress, so then in that case you might need to get a lining fabric to go with it. I haven't played with this yet, but potentially you could fully line this dress and then it would be inside out reversible, which I also think is very cool, and I do talk about that a bit in the instruction booklet. There's also different ways to finish the neckline and the hems. It might be that you're gonna want some sort of like lightweight cotton or quilter's cotton to be able to do side seam pockets, and you might wanna make your own bias facing to finish the hem. And then you might also want some inner facing if you wanna do like an actual facing piece to finish the neck. So those are probably things you already have in your sewing studio, but it's good to kind of keep that in mind for this project that you might want to use those materials. You're gonna wanna figure out what size you are, and then that's gonna help you figure out how much material you need. For the most part, pretty much everyone's gonna need 2.5 yards of fabric. When you start to get into the bigger sizes, you might need more. Also, this is a fairly wide pattern because of the all-in-one sleeve. So if your fabric's really narrow, you might find that you need twice as much fabric to make the garment work. Of course, you want to pre-wash your fabrics is always a smart move, unless you maybe plan to never wash this fabric, which I'm not judging anybody. For example, let me show you some fabric options that I was going to use for today's video. So I did buy this like novelty fabric from Joann's, RIP Joann's. And so this dress, you know, I might not ever really wash this dress, or if I do, I might hand wash it. So I might not be bothered with pre-washing it all. It's also extremely polyester, so I kind of feel like the likelihood of it shrinking or warping is probably gonna be pretty low. So you mainly just wanna think about how do you wanna wash this garment and treat your fabric like that first so that it can do any kind of shrinking or adjustments before you cut into it. I was thinking for this sew-along video, since this pattern is so simple to make, that I would play with making multiple versions of the dress so that you can get an idea of different types of fabrics you can use for this project and different finishes and looks that you can get. So let me show you some of the fabric options that I've grabbed. I showed you this one already. This is kind of a novelty like 2D, 3D mesh. And I think that this could be really fun as just a single layer sheer overlay. In that case, I wouldn't do side seam pockets on a garment like this, and the hemming would be very minimal because since it's see-through, you'd want to be conscientious about what you can see through, and so you'd want kind of really minimal finishing. There also could be a lot of potential for lining a dress like this, and depending on what color you would want to do to line that, because like if you used a black, here's something black. It's a pair of pants. So if you used a black and you lined this fabric with a black, you're going to get a different look. Or if you went for a nude fabric, you would get a different look. But I was thinking that this would look really beautiful sheer, and then you could play with different types of, you know, some sort of spaghetti strap little bodycon, you know, like little underdress, or even like a two-piece, you know, thing, and have your midriff showing. So that was what my thought process was for this fabric. Ooh, look at this one. I got this beautiful fabric from Mulberry Silks in Carborough, and I'm actually making this one to be a sample in their store. And to be honest, I can't remember exactly what this is. It's some kind of rayon for sure. You can see how hard the wrinkles are. I've already washed this material, and it actually kind of changed texture a little bit when I washed it. And so I'm glad that I went ahead and pre-washed it. Although I kind of wonder if maybe I was a little too rough. I just threw it in on like a normal bath, and it kind of lost some of the luster and the softness to it. So I'm partly wondering, I'm like, maybe I should have not washed it and kept it as a dry clean only, you know, things that you learn the hard way, right? But I don't dry clean my clothing, so if I really want this to be a wearable dress, then I want to be able to throw it in the washing machine. So that's what I've done. And so this is a rayon, and we decided that we were going to fully line this version of the dress. And so they also provided me with a really beautiful rayon lining fabric. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with lining because I don't usually do a lot of couture sewing. And when I think of lining fabric, I just think of like really polyester, slippery material. So it was kind of fun to see that Mulberry Silks had this kind of higher quality lining fabric that was made out of a rayon. And I liked the fact that both of these materials were made out of a rayon in terms of complementing each other. So this one is going to be fully lined, and I think I'd like to do side seam pockets, and I think I can absolutely do side seam pockets in the same fabric. So I'm just going to need these two materials for this dress. For this dress, I'm probably going to do like a bias tape finish. So I'm going to need probably like a little black quilter's cotton to just make myself, you know what, I think I have some already. Yeah, right here. I already have some black bias tape made from just some quilter's cotton or some sort of, you know, Kona cotton. And so I will use that for this. It's been a while since I've started collecting these fabrics a while ago, and I haven't looked at them, so it's kind of fun to. So this is just R.I.P. Joann's. I actually bought this after they already started closing. I've been going there like once a week, just seeing what's going on and just being, you know, it's not like Joann's was my favorite, but it was definitely a huge resource in like small town America. And it's going to be interesting to see how it changes our sewing community at large. But this kind of has this like hammered silk texture to it. It has a little bit of a bounce, but it's pretty rigid. I think I was really drawn to it because it kind of has this like shining, the movie The Shining, like the carpet in that movie, kind of op art, kind of has a Stanley Kubrick energy to it. But it's just a polyester, so I can already imagine what it's going to smell like on a summer day. But look at how nice the drape is on that. And I love the hammered quality to it. Oh, here is another mesh. So I made a sample for the photo shoot out of this, and it's actually on the cover of the book, and Mary's modeling it, and she wore it with a really cool harness. She made it really edgy looking, and so I have more of that, but I might stick with doing my sheer option with this more 3D flower fabric. I've got a couple more of just these like kind of polyester. They're sort of like charmeuse-like polyesters in these like really fun prints. Again, all from Joann's. Kind of, these are both kind of like a similar vibe. I love this sort of prism crystallized look, and I love the colors. It has a nice little bit of ease to it. It's a woven fabric, and you can see it has a nice drape. So I definitely want to do something with this one. To be honest, I think I love this print less than I did when I bought it. So maybe this becomes a regift, or maybe I trade with somebody for that. Okay, here is a knit fabric. So I was trying to really find a good knit material so that I could show you all a knit example. And so this is a fun sort of swirly marbling look to it. It's pretty thin. I would call this sort of like a jersey. It is a 4-way stretch, although it's stretchier on the cross grain, and it kind of has sort of a flocked finish to it. It's very, very thin. You know, this might be bordering on too thin in terms of using the pattern for this dress, but maybe I try to make this work and then we can kind of learn through experimenting. I definitely feel like I have been sewing clothing for over 25 years at this point, and I still feel like every project I'm learning something new, because every project I'm usually using a new fabric. And unless I'm making the same pattern with the same fabric, you always have a little bit of an unknown, and each project is a way to learn something new. So I'm kind of wondering if this is too thin, but maybe we use this and we learn together. Lastly, I have this woven fabric. Look at how pretty that is. It's been sitting in the bottom of that bag for a while. It's a little wrinkly. This again has a nice bounce and drape. These are all kind of similar. I think this one has a little bit more of a casual feel to it just because it's not shiny. So like I feel like this shiny one, this dress would lend itself better to being fully lined. And then I think this dress we could get away with it being more casual and doing like a bound neckline finish or simple hem. I just sometimes when I want to make a dress more polished looking, I don't want to see any top stitching, and so like lining makes it really easy to finish a garment without top stitching. So I've got my fabrics together, and let's pull out the pattern. In your pattern envelope, you're gonna have your instruction booklet, and then you're gonna have your pattern pieces printed on this nice kind of 20-pound white paper rather than the tissue paper that's always like a little bit more difficult to work with. So let's open this up. On this pattern, you have 3 pattern pieces. So you have pattern A, which is the main body of the dress, and you will cut 1 on 2 folds, and I'll go over that a little bit more when we get to cutting. You have your optional side seam pocket, which you'll need 4 of those if you want pockets on both sides. And then again, an optional neck facing piece. So if you choose to finish your neck with a facing, you will use this, otherwise you'll disregard it. And then you've got your guide. So we have color coordinated and kind of dot dash coordinated for the different sizes. And then my guide about grain line and notches. So you'll pay attention to the grain line when you go to cut out these pieces. You can kind of see this piece is a little bit more unique looking, so you'll definitely want to reference that. And then in terms of notches, the way that I do my notches is I just mark this little spot here, and then I will clip into the fabric there at about 1/4 of an inch. And so I don't do any kind of diamonds or anything. You could certainly do something other than me, but that's what I do, so that's what you're going to find on this pattern. On the instruction booklet, you're going to find more dynamic sizing reference. So in terms of figuring out what size you want to use, I start by just simply giving you the bust measurement. So this is your actual bust circumference at the widest part of your bust. And so let's say that I'm a size large and I have about a 40 to 42 inch bust. Then you can also further reference down here, you can look at finished garment measurements. So the bust bust measurement for the finished garment measurement is 43.5. So what that's telling me is that if my bust was 42, then I have 1.5 inches extra around there of ease. So if I was teetering on the top end of the large, maybe I was even 42.5, that's when I would look at this and say, okay, well, that's clearly going to be too tight for me. I'm going to want a little bit more room. Or maybe you say, like, I want a little bit more space. Like, I know I want to go ahead and go up to a 1X. And so this can kind of help you make more dynamic decisions about sizing. And then again, this is finished garment measurement. So the waist is quite large because we're flowing away from the body in the A-line style. The hip keeps getting even larger. I give you the arm side measurement. And what I mean by the arm side measurement is basically the vertical measurement from here up to the shoulder and all the way around the shoulder and back to the armpit. And so the way I measured that was I went to kind of like the narrowest point between the top of the shoulder and the armpit, measured that number times 2. So to cross-reference the arm side measurement on your body, you would basically want to measure sort of the vertical circumference here with your arm out in a T shape. So for my arm side here, if I choke it up all the way under my armpit, that number is 18. So then if I look at the size large, which is what I typically make myself, that's 19. So that means I'm gonna have 1 inch of ease there at the arm size. So that feels pretty good to me. So that might be something that you're gonna wanna take a look at. That's a good number. I especially think that kind of maybe one adjustment I might suggest for you is like my friend Judy, she's older, she's gonna be in her 60s, and she is a petite woman, but her torso is as big as my torso now. But she's clearly always been a small or a medium her whole life until, you know, later in life. And so when I put the large on her, it fit her in the bust, but it felt too big in the kind of shoulder area. So if like that might be some like area that you might fall into, I would consider grading between sizes, where I basically would follow the whole side seam of the larger size and then pivot and start following, like right when the seam starts to curve for the armpit. Let me pull up a little drawing really quick. So like follow the side seam of your bust measurement, but then when you get up here and you start turning to do the sleeve, you might want to go for a smaller sleeve. And the good thing is that you could make the larger size, try it on, and then if you feel like you need to tighten it up there in kind of that axis, you have the chance to do that after you've already cut out the garment, which is a huge way that I like to work, is be able to, like, instead of making a mock-up, is to go ahead and cut my garment out and try it on and kind of get it fitting. I just feel like it's really hard to really see how a garment's gonna react until you do it in its final fabric. So unless I'm making a mock-up in my final fabric, I'd kind of prefer to use the final fabric and see how the fit is looking as I go. Other measurements on here are center front to hem and shoulder to hem. So that's going from center front down and then shoulder down. So you could look at that to kind of get an idea of how short you want the dress. Or again, you might want to just cut it as is, try it on, and then decide if you want to shorten it. We're going to start with cutting out the sheer floral fabric. I'm going to start by cutting this sheer floral fabric in a size extra large. And if you're familiar with how a circle skirt is cut, this is a very similar way where we're going to be utilizing 2 folds. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it selvage to selvage lengthwise. Okay, so that's our first fold. So now our second fold is going to be folding from the top edge to the bottom edge here. So perpendicular to our first fold. And I'm making sure that my folded edges are lined up. Everything is square. Now I can lay my pattern piece down. And so just for general reference, this was 2.5 yards of fabric, and let's just see what the width of the fabric is. The width of this fabric is about 60 inches wide, and then I should have gotten 2.5 yards. Okay, so my fabric is actually measuring 84 inches, which is a little bit shorter than 2.5 yards. And you can kind of see that I'm just falling off a little bit here, but I can show you how I can adjust this to make this work. I'll begin by lining up my front edge with my 2 vertical straight grains. And then you see how my sleeve then matches up with my cross grain there. And I can put my weights down. Because this is such a tricky fabric in terms of marking, I think that what my workaround is going to be is I'm just going to leave the pattern weighted on the fabric, and I'm just going to carefully cut directly into the fabric with leaving the pattern on there. This fabric's wild. I've never cut this kind of like sequin-y fabric before. I like to work on a table where I can walk all the way around it, because then I can do my best to not move the fabric and keep it as still as much as possible. And I can move my body around for what my needs are for getting around to cutting this material. I don't know what I've gotten myself into with this fabric. It's wild. You'll have a couple notches around this hem to help you line up. And so I just clip in 1/4 inch at all of those notches. And then let me show you how I'm going to adjust this hem. So since our fabric was a little bit shorter than our pattern needs, what I'm gonna do is I've already cut the side seam, and then I'm just gonna take this pattern and just move it up until I'm back on all 4 layers of fabric. I'm gonna make sure that the straight edge is still lined up with the folds, put my weights back on, and then now I'm just gonna cut it. So you can see there's a little variance here because we've shortened it, but how easy is that in terms of shortening the garment? Let me show you what we've ended up with. So I can unfold it this way and then unfold it this way, and we end up with this crazy looking piece. So now, well, I can put it on, I can show you. Now what's gonna happen is, you can see we will have our 2 side seams. Oh my God, there is so much sequin shedding from this garment. What have I gotten myself into? But yeah, so then already our whole dress is cut out. And then for this dress, I am going to hem this with bias tape, which I already have made. And then we're gonna sew up the side seams. And I honestly think in terms of finishing the hem, this material probably can just be left raw, and I can just tack it. So this is gonna be a really quick sew, and we'll work on that tomorrow. And I'm gonna get to cutting the rest of our fabric choices. What a mess. So again, we've folded this selvage to selvage vertically and then folded it perpendicular to that. This is a size medium, and this is 2.5 yards. So you can see that I have more than enough for this one. And I might even just conserve fabric a little bit and move this down. Let me show you more closely how I mark these notches. So in college and in my career, we always use these professional notching tools. And so at points where we needed to mark the material, we would just clip this little notch into the fabric, or excuse me, into the paper here. And then you can just get your marking tool in there and mark those notches. So for this dress, I'm gonna do the side seam pockets, so I really need to mark where the side seam pockets are going to go. And if you don't use the side seam pockets, you can still use these as notch points to help you line up your side seams. I also need to cut out 4 of my pockets, and I think this fabric, the original fabric of the dress, is gonna be a perfect fabric to make the pockets. So I've got plenty of space on this to cut out the pockets. To properly mark my notches, I just like to clip in at about 1/4 inch into that right there. You just mainly just don't want to clip more than 1/2 inch, because 1/2 inch is your seam allowance. And I just find that to be so much easier than using those diamonds, and this is just what I'm used to. Okay, let's get the rest of this dress cut out. Next, I want to cut out our knit version of the dress, and I was going to do this in a size small. One of the things that I'm thinking is going to be problematic is a lot of times knits, you actually make them smaller because you know that they're going to stretch to fit onto your body. So something that I am worried about is that if I cut on the size small neckline, that it's going to stretch out and be bigger than I want it to be in proportion with a size small. So one change that I'm going to make because of my knit fabric, my stretch fabric, is I'm going to cut out a smaller neck opening. Kind of think I'm gonna go smaller than a double extra small, because what I do know is that when in doubt, I can make the neck hole smaller, I can try it on, and then I can adjust it to fit. Okay, my lighting's a little crazy. I hope you can stick with me. The sun's starting to set right here in front of my studio. The other thing I wanted to bring up about the neckline is that a lot of people out there are gonna have narrow shoulders and they're gonna have sloped shoulders. And what that means is to have such a generously open neckline is probably gonna be problematic for people like that. And so there's a couple things that you can do to troubleshoot that. One is maybe you already make it and you find out that the neck is falling off of you. There are certainly ways that we could add ties to the back of the dress to kind of like help hold the shoulder in. Another option is to not make the dress the same front and back and just bring up one side of the neck to be something more like what you would see on a conventional shirt where the back is higher than the front. And then this will just really guarantee that this is not gonna fall off of your shoulders. You know, the nice thing is that if you're worried, you can always cut it like that, try it on your body, and then decide if you wanna lower it again or if you wanna make a change. So whatever you feel like you might wanna do, I'm just trying to give you some tools to really make this pattern work for you. Because this fabric is so wide and I'm doing a smaller size garment, I'm gonna offset the selvages so that I'm not ultimately cutting the garment in the middle of the fabric, and I can kind of maximize my yield here.